24,000 people have died and thousands injured by a huge earthquake which struck southeastern Turkey near the Syrian border in the early hours of Monday, 7th of February. The earthquake, which hit near the town of Gaziantep, was closely followed by numerous aftershocks, including one quake which was almost as large as the first. The earthquake was at 7.8 on the Richter scale and was felt as far afield as Lebanon, Cyprus, Greece and the Palestinian territories. Many in the earthquake areas and beyond have criticized the government in Turkey, questioning the absence of the authorities in what many see as its lack of preparation and sluggish response to the tragedy. Critics called out that national funds meant for natural disasters like this one were instead spent on highway construction projects managed by associates of Erdogan and his coalition government. With elections approaching in June, the massive earthquakes will impact the country's election campaign, potentially making it even more difficult for the ruling AKP to maintain control over the system. Pakistan says it has agreed to the International Monetary Fund on conditions to release about $1.1 billion in financial aid critical to escape an economic collapse, as an IMF team left cash-strapped Pakistan after 10 days of talks with the government. Finance Minister Ishaq Dar said the payout was delayed due to routine procedures. Pakistan has signed a $6 billion bailout package with the IMF in 2019, with another $1 billion added to the program a year later. The first payment of $1.1 billion has been stalled since December. The Prime Minister has said, "We are committed. We will implement whatever has been agreed upon between our teams," Dar told reporters. Dar said the government will implement fiscal measures demanded by the IMF, including raising 170 billion Pakistani rupees through new taxes. Pakistan is currently in its 23rd IMF program, beginning back in 1958. 65 years on, none of these loans have made any difference to Pakistan's development. In many ways, the repayment of such loans have stifled Pakistan's development. Pakistan is currently expected to end subsidies and raise electricity tariffs to meet its IMF obligations. Pakistan is battling an economic meltdown, compounded by a balance of payment crisis, record inflation, and a plummeting rupee. And now the IMF expects the implementation of crushing terms, which is already crushing the people. The UK rolled out the red carpet for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky on a surprise day-long visit, where talks were held with the British Prime Minister at Downing Street, a meeting with King Charles at Buckingham Palace, and a historic address to the UK Parliament in Westminster. Speaking at the joint press conference at the Lulworth military camp, the British Prime Minister said the priority must be to arm Ukraine in the short term, to ensure the country is not vulnerable to a fresh wave of Russian attacks this spring. Standing alongside Zelensky in front of a British-made Challenger 2 tank, Sunak restated that nothing is off the table when it comes to the provision of military assistance to Ukraine, and said fourth-generation fighter jets were part of his conversation with the Ukrainian president today, and have been previously. Whilst the US has drip-fed Ukraine with weapon systems, the introduction of fighter jets would be a major escalation of the conflict, especially as the spring season approaches and a likely counter-offensive by Russia. The introduction of fighter jets will take weeks to reach the battlefield, but whilst the US is cautious in introducing fighter jets, the Brits have escalated the war a step further. Republican Senator Matt Gaetz introduced the Ukraine fatigue resolution that calls for an immediate end to the US military and financial support for Ukraine and urges the warring sides to negotiate a ceasefire. The Ukraine fatigue resolution was led by Gaetz and received 10 other co-sponsors. If passed, it would express that it is the sense of the House that the United States must end its military and financial aid to Ukraine, and urges all combatants to reach a peace agreement. Throughout the war, Gaetz has been critical of US support for Ukraine and has previously called for an end to the policy. President Joe Biden must have forgotten his prediction from March 2022, suggesting that arming Ukraine with military equipment will escalate the conflict to World War III. Ever since the Republicans took back the House, they have been standing in the way of the Biden administration, and an even smaller faction, who is also pro-Trump, have been holding the government to ransom in return for concessions. They are unhappy that the administration has given a blank check to Ukraine.